Welcome our guest to the show. It's D.A. Roberts from Dax Machina. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
I am glad to have you, man. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I was on your show and I had a blast talking to you guys over there, and I wanted to return the favor and have you over here. So some of my audience may not know who you are. So if you wouldn't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll move into it from there.
I'm a hillbilly from the Ozarks of Missouri. Born and raised a country kid. Grew up deer hunting, motorcycle riding, hunting, fishing, anything your kid can do in the Ozarks. Always dreamed of being a writer. I started getting into cryptids when I was at a very young age because of the Patterson Gimlin footage coming out. I was probably 6 or 7 the first time I saw it. When back in the mid '70s. And then my uncle, who was full-blood Cherokee, he married my mother's sister. My Uncle Buddy was like a second dad to me, and I grew up hearing about the Native American legends behind Bigfoot, and even him telling me of his own personal encounters. And then as a teenager, having a couple of personal encounters on his land. But I've spent most of my life in one uniform or another. I'm ex-Army, did almost 20 years in law enforcement, which is kind of what I bring to the table when I do my cryptid encounters, because I approach everything much like you would a crime scene. Make sure I'm gloving up everything, examining evidence, try to make sure if we collect anything, we change gloves so nothing's getting contaminated. So I try to take a very empirical approach when it comes to cryptid investigations. But it's something that I've been really fascinated with and digging into for years, more so than the paranormal. But I have had a couple of paranormal encounters that have kind of helped guide me along the way. And I've got such a deep appreciation of the field, and I've spent so much time in it. When I started writing, I wanted to write stories that reflected that. So I've got 4 cryptid series, 1 series that's a zombie series, and then a sci-fi series. But I drew upon my background as a cop in the military and cryptid investigations to create these stories.
I love the books, man. I know my buddy Cam has read at least one of the entire books, and he's put it out on both his podcasts, the Dixie Cryptid podcast and the What If It's True. If you guys haven't heard that yet, go over and check out Cam's podcast. He does a really good job narrating that book. So, and I think he's got some more coming down the pipe.
Oh yeah, we got plenty more coming.
So let's talk a little bit about your personal experiences. You know, this is an encounter show. People like to hear about the encounter. So what was your first brush with either the paranormal or what you would consider to be a cryptid?
Well, my first brush with what I believe was a cryptid would have been deer season about 1985. I was about 15 on my Uncle Buddy's land. He had 160 acres that brushed right up against about 5,000 acres of conservation land. It was extremely thickly wooded, and I was in a deer stand. It was before sunup. I was out there early. Had buck fever. I was wanting to get out there early and get set up, and it was probably 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was sitting in this tree stand, and I was probably 12 to 15 feet up on this big oak. And I hear something approaching me behind, and you could definitely tell it's bipedal just by the step. It was walking slowly, and I could hear the leaf litter crunching. And at first I thought it was my uncle. But then I started thinking, wait a minute, that sounds way too heavy to be Uncle Buddy. And I know there was nobody else allowed to hunt on his land, and he was very adamant about that. So I yelled, "Hey, who's back there?" And it stopped. And then I heard this big intake of breath. It went and turned and started walking away. And the tree that I was in was big enough I couldn't just lean out and see around. So I had to scramble down the ladder and get my flashlight up, and I could see the impressions where something big had walked, but it was already long gone. And that was the first encounter on that land. A year later, the following deer season, when I was 16, I had moved that deer stand to a second section of the land. And there was a part of the property that Uncle Buddy said, nobody hunts this section of the property. Stay out of there. It's bad mojo. Don't go in there. Well, I wasn't very far from that, but I was out. I wasn't in that area. And I'd passed on a couple of smaller bucks and one doe, and like I said, had buck fever. I wanted a good one, and pretty soon I got my reward. I see one just kind of walking around. It's like scenting the air and looking around, and he had to be probably in the ballpark of a 12-pointer. He was beautiful, and I was hunting with British 303 with soft tips. and I lined him up, hit him right in the sweet spot, and immediately he went down. So I crawled down out of the tree, and I'm heading over there, and it had gotten up and scampered off while I was getting over there. But when I get to the spot where I'd knocked him down, there was a significant quantity of blood and lung tissue on the ground. So I knew I got him. I'm like, well, he ain't going far. But he was heading for that section of land that I wasn't supposed to go on. But like I said, this was a big buck. So I start trailing it, and I'm finding big, meaty chunks of blood. I'm not finding small drops. I'm finding big ones. And it gets to this ravine and dropped down inside it. It was probably 25 feet down to the bottom of this creek bed. And the creek bed was all rocks, rocky soil, rocks, big rocks, and leaf litter. It was an empty creek bed, and I couldn't just drop down in there. I could see where it had fallen. I could see it down there. So I marked the spot, and I head down the ravine looking for a place that I can safely drop. And I finally find a spot that's about 6 feet up, and I scramble down and then reach up and grab my rifle and bring it down. And by the time I get back to where it was, I'd gone several hundred yards down finding a spot to get. I get back to the spot where the deer was at, and there was a tremendous amount of blood. Obviously, it bled out right there. Not another drop, not a footprint, no drag marks, nothing. And this was the mid 80s. There were no black bear in Missouri at the time. They'd been hunted out. They were reintroduced around 1995, 1996. But at that time, nobody had seen a black bear in Missouri in probably 80 years. We had mountain lions in Missouri, but you and I both know if a mountain lion takes a kill, it's going to drag it and probably take it to a tree. There were no drag marks. This had not been dragged. If coyotes had been around, it was during the day, but if coyotes had been around, they would have destroyed the kill on the spot. Coyote kills are messy. There'll be tufts of hair and blood and tissue all over the place. That wasn't the case. It was just gone. So I spiral out looking for it, and I can't even find another drop of blood. Like I said, this is pretty rocky ground, hard packed ground. So I grabbed my little Motorola radio and I called my uncle. I said, "Hey, Uncle Buddy, somebody took my deer. There's somebody on your land." He says, "Where are you at?" And I told him, and he said, "Hey, you're not supposed to be over there." I said, "Well, that's just where I tracked it to. I didn't hunt here. I tracked it to here." And he paused for a minute and he goes, "There is nobody in that section of land. Get out of there. If you keep following it, you're not going to like what you find. Get out of there and come back to the house." So I made my way back to the house, and he sat me down and he goes, "That's the section of land I tell you to stay out of, because there's things in there. That's what took your deer." He said, "If you'd have gone any farther, you probably would have got took too." He said, "Stay out of that section of land. I can't stress that enough. There are things out there that will take you."
Do you think he was talking about Sasquatch? Do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, go ahead.
Sorry. He was definitely talking about Sasquatch. He said that section of land was right up close to the conservation land. He said that if you go into that area, he says people don't hunt that area. Dogs won't go in that area. He said they're in there, and if you go into that area, you're probably not coming out.
You mentioned something about other paranormal experiences. What? Any other things that you can share as far as experiences that you had as a child or in your adult life?
Well, primarily, I didn't really have a whole lot of paranormal stuff as a young man. It was years later. My wife was having. We lived in this house out on the south side of town, out on the south end of Springfield, on a road called was it Ridgecrest? No, Rockwood. We lived on a road off of lived on a house at the end of the cul-de-sac on Rockwood Drive, and it was a 2-story house. And our boys' bedrooms were upstairs. And mine and my wife, the master bedroom, was downstairs. And I worked a lot of overnights because I was still a deputy at the time. Well, she says she kept feeling like there was something in the house. And I didn't really, put a whole lot of stock into it. I mean, I don't disregard it. I didn't say, "Oh, you're full of it," or anything like that. I just, I didn't sense it. I refer to myself as a psychic brick because I generally don't notice stuff like that. But she kept saying she felt like there was something there. And then one night, she was sitting at her computer in our bedroom, and we had her computer set up was she could just lean out and look down the hallway in case she heard the boys. She said she felt like somebody was at the end of the hallway. So she leaned out and said at the end of the hallway was a little girl dressed very much like they would in Little House on the Prairie, like an old style 1800 dress with the apron and everything. Little girl had pigtails, and said the little girl looked right at her and said, "Mama." And before she could respond, she was gone. And, she told me about that, and I'm like, are you sure you weren't just like really dozing off or something? I'm not saying you didn't see it. I'm just saying, you sure you didn't doze off? She goes, no, I was wide awake. So I said, okay, well, she sees this little girl 3 or 4 more times. Then one night I'm coming home. I got off work early. And it was still, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I pull into our driveway, and just at the edge of our driveway is this little shrub, like a little pine, like almost like a pine tree, but it was like one of those pine like bushes. And I needed to trim it for a while, so it was more of a shrub than anything else, just big. And as I'm pulling in the driveway, my headlights light that up, and out steps this little girl. Pigtails, the dress, full body apparition. I'm looking at her. I slam on the brakes, throw the car in park, and I jump out. And the first thing that's going through my head is there's this 10-year-old little girl at 4 o'clock in the morning wandering around my neighborhood. I'm wondering if she's okay. It's not clicking what my wife had seen. So I get the flashlight out. I check behind the tree, and my backyard was huge. My boys and I used to play baseball and football out there. There was no way she had sprinted across that backyard to get away. So I'm out checking around the neighbors' houses and everything. Cannot find this little girl. I go in the house and I said, honey, just saw something really bizarre out there. I think there's a kid wandering around the neighborhood. She said, well, what'd they look like? I said, it was a little girl. And as soon as I started describing her, I clicked. My wife goes, that's the same little girl I've been seeing at the end of the hallway. And I was like, oh my God. So then about a week later, I went to the county courthouse and looked up the history of that land. And apparently back in the mid 1800s, there had been a farmstead there that had burned down. So right where our house sat, there was a house, and I couldn't find any record of anybody being killed there, but apparently there was a farmhouse there that had burned to the ground until that land sat empty for years before housing developments went in on it.
I want to go back, if we could, to the land and your uncle and your experience in the woods. I had something very similar happen to me, not the disappearing deer thing, but bluff charging, growling, just this really ominous feeling when I was in the woods when I was about 12. It sounds like to me your uncle knew what was going on.
Oh, yeah, he definitely knew that was out there.
Had he had experiences of his own, or did he tell you any more about the history in the land and what he knew about these things that were in the woods that were taking deer?
Well, he specifically chose that land because of its remoteness. His nearest neighbor was, I think, 3 or 4 miles away. The nearest town was a little town called Eldridge, Missouri, and it's what we refer to as a poke and plumb town. You poke your head out the window and you plumb through it. Nothing more than a little gas station / general store / post office and a couple of houses. And he lived probably 10 miles outside of that. The nearest big town would have been Lebanon. That's where I grew up, and it was only a town of about 10,000. So he was in the middle of nowhere, and that's the reason he chose that land, because he wanted to be as far off the grid as he could be. But he told me, I think I was probably 7 or 8. After watching the Patterson-Gimlin, I talked my mother into buying me some of those old Time Life books that had Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and stuff in it. And I devoured those. And I would go around asking all my relatives if they'd had a Bigfoot sighting. Of course, they all thought I was just a dumb kid and laugh about it. But one day we were out at Uncle Buddy's house, and I was, like I said, about 6 or 7. He waited till everybody was outside, and he picked me up and he put me on his leg. And he said, Douglas, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen. I said, okay. He said, they're real and they're on this land. And that's why I tell you to not go wandering off in the woods. These things are very real, and I've seen them multiple times on this land. And the clearest sighting he ever saw is his house was split level, and it was built on a bluff overlooking the Niagara River Valley. And he was going downstairs where his pool table was at one night. He said he was just going down to shoot a little pool. And he flipped on the lights, and there was a sliding glass door in the basement that went out onto a small deck. And when he stepped into that room with the light on, there was one standing in the sliding glass door looking in the house. And he said it was hunched down looking in the sliding glass door. He said it had to have been almost bent at the waist. He said he guessed it probably would have been in a 9 foot tall range, but it was just so massive. And he said the first thing I did, he says, just instinct, I reached for a rifle. And it turned and sprinted off the deck. And the bluff side that went down to the Niagara River Valley was probably 60 degrees. I mean, there's no way I would have climbed it without a rope. He said it went off and straight down that, just grabbing like scrub brushes and rocks as it went down. He said it was down on the valley floor before he could bring the rifle up. He said it was just incredibly fast and disappeared across the river. And he said from time to time he would see him near the house, but for the most part, what he would hear is he would go out on his deck to have coffee in the morning. He'd hear them whooping in the distance.
I want to talk about something else that I haven't done a lot on this show. Honestly, I've only had 2 guests on so far that have had any kind of a Dogman experience. I had Bettina Moss on recently. And before that, it was Christine Ann that I had on. And she said she had 5 or 6 encounters with Dogman. I know from your channel and from knowing you that you came close to a brush at least once with Dogman. Would you kind of tell us what that experience was like and kind of paint the picture for the audience about what happened there?
Well, about a year ago, Nick Valente and I went to the Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky. And I got there a couple days before him, but all in all, I think we spent 4 days together, and I was there for about a week, just prowling and going these back places throughout LBL. And I had a couple of close brushes with something I think was stalking me, because I was looking back, I probably wasn't the smartest thing, but I was going around in the dark at LBL by myself. I went to the Nickel Cemetery by myself. I went down to Demumbers Bay. There was nobody camping down there. I went to some of the creepier places of LBL by myself in the dark. And a couple of times I heard something pacing me. But, you know, my mother used to say when I was a small boy that I would blunder in where angels feared to tread. And that was kind of the motto of my law enforcement career. I always wanted to be the first guy to kick the door. I didn't want to be the second guy in the stack. I've always wanted to be the first one in. And that's kind of how I lived my life. But so I was more than willing to go head to head to go find out what it was. But I started getting the feeling that I was probably in over my head. So I backed off and I didn't do much at night until Nick got there. But on our last day in LBL, we were coming back from Demumbers Bay. And have you been to LBL? Well, there's an area called Demumbers Bay, and it's a beautiful area, very thickly wooded, and all you can see is water because of the way it's set. You can't see out on the lake. It's a big bay. Well, we went down to Demumbers Bay, and we were looking around. And as you're coming back, there's a narrow, like concrete slab bridge, and we crossed this little narrow bridge, and there was nobody fishing nobody anywhere down in that area. It was just us, and we crossed that bridge, and we're driving 4 or 5 miles an hour, and we're kind of looking at the trees on the side. And I glanced over and thought, and just kind of as I'm sweeping the area, I just saw this dark shape, but it didn't register what I'd just seen. And I was like, oh, wait a second, and turned my head back. And there it was. It was about between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. And I could see the perfect silhouette of it. It had its hand on the tree. And it was looking right at me. And when it realized I saw it, then it moved. And I'm like hitting Nick in the shoulder, like, hey, hey, hey. And he looks over, and I saw it for probably at the most 20 seconds, realistically between 10 and 15 seconds, but at the most 20 seconds. Nick saw it for about 10 because I was like beating him on the shoulder. Once it realized that we saw it, it was completely black, had a head like somewhere between a wolf and a German shepherd, but the snout was blunter. I couldn't really tell the color of its eyes because it was backlit. But once it realized we saw it, it took off, and it did this really kind of weird loping bound. It kind of went to the side, and then it went down a ravine. So we jump out of the car and go over there, and you could see in the leaf litter where it had been, but it was too thick and the ground was too hard packed to get any kind of casting. But we could still hear it tearing ass down through that ravine. He's like, you want to go after it? And I looked at how the slope was, and neither of us were armed, and we didn't have any ropes. And I'm like, maybe not. Probably not the best thing we can do to chase this thing. So we marked the area so we could go back and look for tracks later. And I took a snapshot of the area, but I didn't get any images of the creature because it just happened so fast. And the irony is I had my phone in my hand with the camera app up in case I saw something. But when I saw it, it was just absolute paradigm shift that it was there, and never got a single image. and Nick and I want to go back there. We're already planning a trip back next year. But we had a full visual sighting. And funny you should bring this subject up. A month ago, well, just over a month ago, the last weekend in September, I went up to a paranormal conference in Lexington, Missouri, called Fall into the Paranormal. And most of it was at a place called the Big River Horse Ranch. And there's cabins out there and camping hookups and everything. And we were having a Bigfoot bonfire way out in the woods off the ranch. And had a whole bunch of people out there, and my wife was out there, and my sons were out there, and we're having a good time. We had a big bonfire going, and we're just talking about Bigfoot. Well, the whole time we were there, you could hear something walking around us in the woods. And at one point, it was throwing stuff at my wife and Krista, one of the other ladies that was there. You could see the come sailing out of the trees, but every time we would light it up, and I had a couple of really bright flashlights. I had one of my old duty lights. It was a ProTac HL5 and 3,500 lumens. That was lighting up the area, but we never once saw eye shine. We never saw anything, but we could hear it. So around midnight, everybody's calling it a night because we weren't spending the night at the ranch. We had a hotel in town. My wife and I and my two boys, Noah and Connor, we get in the car and we're leaving the ranch, and maybe a half a mile from the ranch, I've got my bright lights on. It's a gravel road, so we're driving fairly slow. I see something coming out of a cornfield on the right side of the road, so I start slowing down because I don't want to hit a deer or anything. And that was the first thought. Was it's probably a deer or something coming out. Well, this thing comes out of the corn. It was on all fours, and its back was taller than the front end of my SUV. This thing, the back probably was 4.5 feet off the ground on all fours. It moved like a predator. My wife says she saw a tail, but I don't remember seeing a tail. I was fixated on the eyes because, as you know, a deer, there's a reason for the phrase deer in the headlights. You hit your deer with bright lights, it'll freeze. This didn't freeze. It felt like it locked eyes specifically on me. I mean, I was like locked on this thing's eyes, and they were luminescing a bright, almost white, but greenish white. And it maintained eye contact with me for the full 30, 40 seconds we watched it crossing this road, and it did it slow. It moved like a dog. The big beefy back legs with the hocks. Again, I don't remember seeing the tail. My wife said it definitely moved like a predator, and if she was up here, you could ask her. She said, "I don't know what the hell it was," but me and my sons we all think it was a Dogman, and it was huge. It was massive, and it was half a mile from where we were at in the woods. So we're pretty sure that was what was circling us. Well, it gets better. We get this sighting, and again, we saw this thing for a good long time. I don't know if you're following the news, but you heard about that Amazon driver that was mauled to death here in Missouri?
I didn't see it on the news, but I heard you talking about it on your show. So please tell us that story.
There's an Amazon delivery driver that was mauled to death just a couple of weeks ago up near Lexington, Missouri. And the local PD said it was dogs from this house, and they shot the dogs and put the dogs down. But I have a friend who is friends with the coroner in that county. It's in Ray County, Missouri. They said that there was way too much damage for it to have been dogs, like an incredible amount of damage. It was the worst thing the coroner had ever seen. So I don't think it was just a couple of dogs that mauled this guy. That was 12 miles from our sighting.
That's crazy.
So I'm going to go up there. I'm planning a trip up to Ray County, Missouri. I've got to hook up with my friend and get the introductions and talk to the coroner and see what I can find out. But I'm planning on going back up to that area to do a full investigation of the area, because I don't think it was dogs. Kind of like the two that were mauled to death in Crook County, Tennessee. There was a male and a female both mauled to death, and the female, they said that she had been mauled to death by dog. Well, they claimed both of them were mauled by dogs, but I got a glimpse of the autopsy reports. The woman was missing 40% of her body mass. 40%. You can't tell me two mid-size pit bulls did that.
No, it definitely sounds like something else. I know there was one particular incident where you took some photographs, and did you or did you not capture something that
Yes, we
may or
did.
may not be a dog man? Will you tell us that story and how that came about?
Well, I was when I was researching the book that I wrote called The Lakeview Man. There's an old abandoned campground down near Kimberling City, Missouri. The Army Corps of Engineers shut it down back in right around the year 2000. I couldn't find a public explanation on why they shut it down, but I did find I think it was 8 or 9 disappearances associated with the park. Um, but the funny part is when I went back to pull those records of the disappearances, they were gone. I couldn't find them again. But we went down to this abandoned campground and snuck in late at night to shoot a promo for Lakeview Man. And we shot the promo. It was my buddy Steve, who's also one of my co-hosts, Steve Monrodis. Our wives were in my van, and I'm just like standing there talking and pointing a flashlight around and having a good old time. And we shot this little promo video for the Lakeview Man, and got in the car and left. Didn't think anything of it. I got home, went to upload it to YouTube, and noticed a bunch of eye shine. But this is the woods in Missouri, so eye shine's not that big a deal. I mean, you've been in the woods, yeah. You go in the woods at night, you're gonna see eye shine. It could be it could be raccoons, it could be possums, it could be anything. So eye shine didn't bother me, although some of them were fairly high off the ground. Again, didn't put too much stock in it. Year and a half passes, and I'm on a show called we're doing a show called The Nightmare Hunter, and we showed this promo. We were talking about the book The Lakeview Man, and while we're showing the promo, there's a guy in the audience named Thomas Whitney, and Thomas goes, "Hey, something moved when you were pointing your flashlight across that little concrete bridge. There's something moving back there." And I'm like, "There's nothing back there. I've watched this video 100 times. There's nothing back there." He goes, "No, I'm telling you, something moved." So I sent the video, the raw video, to a couple buddies of mine who do video analysis, and they sent me back a couple of stills that were terrifying. At about 9.5 feet off the ground, behind one of the trees that had no shrubs behind it, you can see the hand, claws, arm, part of the shoulder, and the head of what looks like a massive canine leaning out around this tree. And when I shine that ProTac at it, you can see it clearly duck back behind the tree, then come back out. I was freaked out about that. So I show the video to MK Davis, who does all the Patterson-Gimlin analysis. And MK goes, "I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something back there, and it's moving independently of the background. There is something back there." So we go back out to that exact spot, find the exact tree. You can find, if there were faded claw marks on the tree, because like I said, it was a year and a half later. And there were no bushes behind this tree that it could have been. There were no other trees that it could have been. And lo and behold, we measured it out. The head would have been about 9.5 feet off the ground. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever seen a black bear that big. There hasn't been a grizzly sighting in Missouri in 150 years. There's no way it was a black bear. If it was a person, they had to have climbed the tree to lean out. The whole video and the analysis of the video is on my YouTube channel. You can look it up. It's youtube.com/DA Roberts Author, and look for the Joe Bald breakdown video. It has all of the stills and everything. You can watch it and decide for yourself what you think it is. I know what I think it is. I think we were less than 20 yards from a Dogman. And that's actually how I got involved with the NADP. I sent the video to Nick Valente from the NADP, and he told me it was the best example of a Type 3 Dogman he'd ever seen captured on video. And we were just astounded. And that's how I wound up getting involved with the NADP. It was the most astounding part is as a cop, and you know this too, you're a trained observer. You're trained to watch your surroundings, and I didn't know it was that close. And I was carrying a Glock 17, so it's not like I went out in the woods unarmed. However, the 21-foot rule. If somebody's within 21 feet of you with a knife, you're not going to get your weapon drawn. Well, this thing was farther than 21 feet, but I also have seen how fast these things are. There's no doubt in my mind I would not have been able to clear had it charged us. I think it would have easily gotten us. But I don't know. Well, I think I know what confused it, because my buddy Steve went and peed on that exact tree. So I think it was trying to figure out, like, what the hell are these two idiots doing? And we we didn't know it was there. We didn't sense any danger. We shot our little video, got in the van, and left. But I showed the video to Steve later after we did the breakdown, and he's like, you know what? I was an Eagle Scout, and now I'm scared to go back in the woods. I am not going back out there.
I'll definitely link to that I'll put that on our website so you can view it directly on DA's YouTube. It's definitely worth checking out for sure. There's definitely something there. I've seen it. I can't say definitively what it is, but there's definitely something there.
Yeah, I can't 100% say exactly what it is either. But in my heart of hearts, it looked like a Dogman to me. Everybody's free to look at it and decide what they think it is. But I truly think we captured a Dogman on film.
Well, I want to stick with the Dogman thing for a while because I had Bettina Moss on, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, and she's had several encounters with these things. And it's just one of those things that I have never been able to check the box on. I've still got that cop brain and I like to check boxes, and
oh yeah,
I got to get out of that. I understand, but Dogman just has never made sense to me. So you've actually probably seen one at least a couple of times now, and maybe even captured one on video. So let me ask you, based on what you know, what you've observed, and the research that you've done and the people that you've talked to, help me understand what it is you think these things are. Do you think there's something paranormal? Do you think they're demonic? Do you think they're flesh and blood? Where are they coming from? What is it that you know about them that you can share with the audience and frankly me, so I can have a better understanding of these things?
Well, I think I can help you check that box off because I have really dug into the research. I think they're definitely flesh and blood. The condition of dog-headed type creatures called cynocephaly, and the reason it's called that is because both the Romans and the Greeks talked about tribes of dog-headed warriors that they fought in Africa and in India. They referred to them as the cynocephalus. Then of course you've got Anubis and Wepwawet, the two dog-headed or wolf-headed, jackal-headed entities in Egyptian mythology. Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus, both in their journals recorded encountering dog-headed creatures on islands during their travels. The Catholic saint, Saint Christopher, is depicted as a dog-headed saint. He was referred to as the dog-headed saint. So these things have been seen for a long time, long before we had the term Dogman. In fact, the earliest known sighting reports coming out of the LBL area, which back then it was the land between the lakes, land between the rivers, not the land between the lakes, date back to the late 1600s from French trappers in the area, referred to it as the loup-garou. So there's a long history of sightings of creatures like this. In fact, the Choctaw even have a legend of Bigfoot and Dogman going to war over resources. So it's not like this is a new type creature. The Cherokee call them the Ulanga Doglala, or the knife dogs. There's as much Native American lore on Dogman, although that's under many different names. There's as much lore as there is on Bigfoot. So I think this is very much a flesh and blood creature. I think Bigfoot's a flesh and blood creature. I think they're just very, very adept at avoiding us, and they're very good at hiding. In fact, a lot of researchers have been looking at Bigfoot hair, and Doug included. They talk about the clear shaft with no medulla. That would absorb and redirect the color of light around it. So if it stepped into a green foliage, it would appear green. That to me could be easily explained, what people refer to as cloaking. I mean, I had a buddy that was an Army Ranger that we grew up together, deer hunting together. When he got out of the Rangers, I was making fun of him, like, you guys aren't that badass. I could find you in the woods. And he goes, oh yeah, try it. And I turned around and he was gone. And I spent the next half hour trying to find him. And he said, I almost stepped on him a couple of times, but I never found him. And that was a guy who was taught to do it. He's not a creature born to it, wearing a living ghillie suit. These things don't want to be found, and you're not going to find them unless it's, either intentional or purely by accident.
I think one of the things that sort of sets us all back when we're doing this kind of research is some of the evidence, right? We talk about hair, we talk about photographs, we talk about videos, footprints, foot castings of footprints, things like that. In all fairness, when I had Bettina on the show, she sent me tons of pictures that she had taken, and a couple of videos, and I posted them up. And of course, the floodgates opened, and it was, well, that's just a tree, that's just leaves. And I'll be honest, I had a hard time seeing what she saw in those photos. Mm-hmm. So photographic evidence obviously is not the best. Video maybe a little bit better, but I feel like we're in the same position with Dogman that we're in with Bigfoot all these many, many decades after the Patterson-Gimlin film, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I just had Michael Freeman on the show a couple of weeks ago, and his dad, Paul Freeman, his footage, some of the probably number 2 out there as far as most talked about and most, revered in some cases of a purported Sasquatch caught on video. Now, admittedly, the camera that he was using back in the early 90s to capture this footage was horrible. It was pixelated. I think Michael said it was something like 400 pixels. But Doug Hychek meticulously went through almost 20 years of trying his best to stabilize and enhance and zoom in on this. And I've seen the enhanced footage. It should be out in maybe another week and a half when the book comes out. So everybody will see it. But Doug and Michael sent it to me to look at. I was astonished at what I saw, because I can see in this video not only a better view of what Paul Freeman saw step across that path in front of him, but I actually saw this creature picking up what looks to be a baby or a juvenile Sasquatch off of a tree and carrying it off. So I'll be honest, when it comes to that in the Patterson-Gimlin film, for me, what I saw in the enhanced version of the Paul Freeman footage, it goes beyond what I think I see in the Patterson-Gimlin film, because some days I'm 50-50 on the Patterson film being an authentic true life Sasquatch, to be honest with you. Some days it's more like 80%. Most days it's 50-50. But so I ask you, is there anything that's really stuck out to you as far as, let's take Dogman first and then we'll go into Bigfoot. Is there anything that's really stuck out that you've seen as far as just what you consider to be, this is an absolute positively identified creature that somebody's either caught on film or on video?
Well, the problem with photographic evidence and with video evidence is, and this wasn't the case back during the time of the Patterson-Gimlin film, but Photoshop and video shop programs are so readily available, it is very difficult to accept any photographic or video evidence at face value. It's got to be thoroughly investigated. And unfortunately, and I'm probably going to piss a few people off here, but unfortunately, every group on Facebook is flooded with pictures with red circles and arrows on them that are just bushes. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm gonna call it what it is. It's just a bush that they have zoomed in on so much that 2 leaves kind of look like ears, and suddenly it's a Bigfoot or a Dogman. I really wish people would quit posting stuff like that, because if it's not a clear image, all you're really going to do is start an argument. And I guarantee you, I could go in my backyard right now. I've got a honeysuckle bush at the back of the yard, and there's a house behind it. But I could go back, get up close to that honeysuckle bush, snap a picture, throw a couple circles on it, and I'd get 25 people swear they saw it. And that's the problem. And it's really those red circle and arrow photos do more harm to the field than they do good. I'm happy there are people out there doing boots on the ground research. I do as much as I can as well. But the problem is I don't post a lot of pictures, because unless it's a clear image, I'm not going to post red circle images. Now, the Joe Bald breakdown video has a couple of red circles, but it's circling the head of the creature. It's not circling where we think something moved. And it even highlights the area where it's moving on the camera. So that's, to me, the exception to the rule. But unfortunately, there's just so much of that red circle and red arrow material out there that it casts. It's almost like it's intentional, like it's intended to ruin the credibility of any good image that comes forward. So I don't think there's going to be any video or edit or photographic evidence that's ever going to be the smoking gun, because it's too easy to fake. And look how many times we've had hoax videos show up. I don't think there's any one Dogman video I can point out that I would call smoking gun evidence. There was one really good one of a Dogman digging in a graveyard. but I can't say with any degree of certainty if it's even real. I don't know the history of that video. I don't know who took it. I don't know. It's not clear enough to be able to tell if it's somebody in a costume. It easily could have been somebody in a costume. And the problem is just because you took a clear image of something doesn't mean it wasn't somebody hoaxing you and you didn't know they were there. So I'm only about 10% invested in any photo or evidence, even the Patterson Gimlin footage. As much as that is presented as the smoking gun footage, how many times has that footage been gone over and gone over and gone over? And MK Davis, who I consider basically the best available expert on the PG film, is convinced it's real. So I'm as much time as he spent now analyzing that footage, I'm willing to give MK the benefit of the doubt. Fantastic guy, really knows his stuff when it comes to video analysis. So he's convinced it's real, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. But that footage has been gone over frame by frame, backwards and forwards, until people are blue in the face with it. So unfortunately, every other bit of footage other than the Freeman footage you're talking about is either so grainy you can't really see what it is, or, and in the case of one guy from Canada who I won't name because he's very polarizing in the community, absolutely crystal clear with no explanation. So I can't take any of those at face value. And even I'm the Region 2 Midwest Director of the NADP. Even when I get photos and people circles, oh, I got a Dogman in an image. I'm like, okay, I'm glad you think you got a Dogman, but I'll tell people I just don't see it. Unfortunately, I think our best chance of coming across evidence for Dogman, and this is falling back on me being a cop, is going to be tracks, eyewitness accounts, because we study eyewitness accounts and look for the similarities, and those similarities are the bits of evidence we can use to establish patterns and establish behaviors, and DNA either through scat or through hair. Unfortunately, technology being what it is, video and picture evidence are probably never ever going to be something we can fully accept.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm the same way. I don't post a lot of photos. I found things that look like tree structures and X formations and fulcrum type setup kind of deals on my property. I had this weird experience recently with a turtle stuck into a stump on the property that I posted a video about on my Instagram. And immediately people were like, well, it's got to be Bigfoot. No, I'm not saying that, right?
Could have been a traveler. I mean, just some person who was backpacking.
And then I did this really interesting thing where I put out an apple and a rock and put up a trail cam. 3 days, I got nothing. Took the camera down the third day, went back the very next day, and something had taken a big bite out of the apple. And I eventually posted the pictures of the apple, and it does look like a person or something with a mouth shaped like a person. Mm-hmm. Picked the apple up and took a bite of it and stuck it back into the stump where I had it. It's just really weird. Mm-hmm. But it's even happened with that. I posted some of the still photographs of the night vision camera taking these photos of these raccoons on the property. And somebody took my photograph and claimed that they found this black figure. And they zoom in on it and they did something with the lighting or the contrast in the photo. And it does look really weird. It looks like there's something standing to the left where this picture is taken on my property. And I'm like, so people can literally take anything and make something out of it. So, right. And I think it really does a disservice. All these pictures of Paradolia I see in all these groups, and people are just adamant that it's Pat from Squatch Talk did it recently. He did, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. He purposely went out and just took random photos on a hike and zoomed in and got 3 or 4 like really good Paradolia type pictures. Absolutely nothing but leaves there. He did a couple of red circles and posted them. And then he did a follow-up show on Squatch Talk maybe a week after or so. That post reached like 75,000 people. And Pat does it. He was like, I don't have that reach. He's got like 900 people in his fans group for the show. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's only because of and he didn't use the word Bigfoot. He didn't say anything about Bigfoot. He just posted the photos with the red circles, and it just spread like wildfire. And I just can't understand why the community as a whole is like that. It's so frustrating to me when I think there is good evidence out there. And I know you don't want to talk about it. And I know people are cringing because my listeners know I'm going to say Todd Standing.
He who shall not be named.
They hate it when I talk about Todd on the show. And I said it as soon as I went on Squatch Talk the other day randomly, like on Friday. Pat was doing a show and he had 4 or 5 people on. And I was commenting and they invited me on the show. As soon as I got on the show, Jeff, hey, you just posted this video of your interview with Todd Standing. Well, it was an old video that I posted just recently. And that's all everybody wanted to talk about. But, you know, he is somebody in the community. I said it on Pat's show. He is somebody, whether you like him or not, he's a polarizing figure. Whether you believe his stuff is real or not, I think he is due at least part of the conversation. I think all of his videos are complete bullshit and I don't think they're real. But I do think he's having experiences in that area. I believe there's Sasquatch there. I believe that he's having these experiences. I just don't believe the videos that he's purporting to be real are real. So it just really
that's the problem. It doesn't matter how many real encounters you have. The first time you post a fake video, your credibility's gone.
And that's the honest truth, right? You know, I said I hate it because I like Todd as a person. I've gotten to know Todd outside of doing the show, and you know, I think he's a really good guy, and I think for the most part, his heart's in the right place. And he even said it on my show: if I faked this, it was for species recognition, right? Mm-hmm. Never admitted it. It was just a what if kind of thing, but it was kind of a one-off, in my opinion, way of saying, if I did it for the right reasons. But regardless, there are no right reasons to fake stuff. It even came up with the Paul Freeman stuff, you know. Mm-hmm. They were talking about on Pat's show when I was on there. They were kind of questioning the fact that he had fake tracks in his, out of the 45 or 50 casts that he had that his son still has. Of course he had fake tracks. Everybody that casts tracks are eventually going to find fakes. It doesn't mean that Paul Freeman faked those. He cast some fake track that somebody had made. I don't think Paul Freeman was faking tracks. I could be wrong, you know, but I just don't get that impression.
Well, just because you find a track in the woods, you know, and you cast that track doesn't mean you're trying to perpetrate a hoax, but it doesn't mean one wasn't pulled on you.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about Bigfoot. We've kind of covered the evidence part of it. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that come up on my show often, and I'm sure when you interview people who have had Bigfoot encounters, the woo part of Bigfoot, right? Mm-hmm. I think they're flesh and blood. You said you think they're flesh and blood. Most people do. But what do you make of these weird things that happen to some people during their encounters? Either A, they're completely full of shit and they're telling a lie, or they're embellishing their encounter, or something weird's going on in relation to Bigfoot encounters. Have you had that? You've interviewed people who have had these sort of weird encounters with Bigfoot. And what do you make of that? Do you think there's a correlation, or do you think it's just something that's independently happening?
Well, I've talked to a lot of people who've experienced what you refer to as the woo. And in some of those cases, I firmly believe they believe that's what happened. Now, I talked to a very credible guy that I know who's Cherokee. He lives on one of the Cherokee reservations in Oklahoma. And he mentioned he was walking along a creek on a trail, and he rounded a corner, and there was a Bigfoot not 20 feet away from him. He said maybe 10, 15 feet. It was close. And he said it put its hand up like this, like it was blocking its eyes, and stepped into the bushes and disappeared. I said, do you think it, went through a portal or vanished? He goes, no. He says, what I think is it's got some weird ability that once it hit the green trees, I just couldn't see it anymore. He said it didn't walk through a portal. It didn't turn invisible. It didn't shimmer and disappear. It just picked up the color of the foliage around it, and I couldn't see it anymore. He says the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I think that clear hair shaft and the fact that they're wearing a natural ghillie suit, if you've got a person that has not spent a whole lot of time in the woods, they could easily think that they just cloaked, that they disappeared into the foliage and walked through a portal, because people will look, when people don't understand something, they will sometimes ascribe very outlandish theories to what what made him do that. I've never seen one walk through a portal. I've never seen one, turn into a predator shimmer effect and disappear. But I'm also at that same point, I'm not going to dismiss their case because they believe they did. Now, coming from a law enforcement background, and this is addressing what people refer to as mind speak. They said they've had Bigfoot, like you need to leave or get out of this area. It's never long conversations. It's like you're in danger and stuff like that. I was checking an empty building one night, and I went in the door and I had my pistol out, and I knew there was someone in the building because I could hear him. And I took a few steps into the darkness of that building, and the lizard part of my brain goes, "You're in danger. Get out of here." And that wasn't anything mind speaking with me. That was just good old ass saving fear telling me you're about to get in over your head and probably get yourself killed. So I backed out, kept an eye on the door until another officer came, and we went in. And it's a good thing we did because there were 5 people in that building, and I probably would have gotten myself killed. And that wasn't, Bigfoot mind speaking with me. That was just that primitive part of my brain saying, you're in danger. You're about to get yourself in something you can't handle. And I can't say for 100% that that's every case of mind speak, but in incidents when they've been, when they go into an area and like they get the message that go away, you're in danger, back out. I've had that happen to me in the woods too. Walk into an area of dead silence. I'm like, something's not right here. I should probably back out of here until I got somebody else with me. And it wasn't anything broadcasting into my brain. My thing is, when it comes to mind speak or anything that they refer to as the woo, and I'm not dismissing, I'm not going to dismiss anybody's encounter. Their encounter is their encounter. And I will still research all encounters to look for those commonalities, to look for behavior. However, there is no other animal in the animal kingdom that can do this. There's no other animal anywhere on the planet that will just vanish. Now, they do have footage of mountain gorillas who's going into the foliage and their hair flashing green for a few seconds as they enter. We do have that on video footage. We know that happens. We also know that animals that are very adept at hiding in the woods will not be found. For example, you're a deer hunter, correct? What has given away the deer every time you've gotten one? If it didn't move, you didn't see it. And that's just a deer. It doesn't have any special properties about its hair. If it's in the bushes and it ain't moving, you ain't seeing it. Unless you've got eyes like Hawkeye from the Avengers, you're not going to see it. Every deer I've ever shot, the only reason I saw it is because it moved. Ear twitch, tail twitch, a little bit of movement. It takes a step. It's up until the time it moved, I never freaking saw it. And that's just because it was sitting still. We look for patterns and we look for movement. And of those two, movement is going to be the better one to give it away. That's the same thing with Paradolia. Our brains are hardwired to look for patterns. If you take a digital image and you zoom in on bushes, your brain is going to look for those patterns. And that's why it's a phenomenon. It's why it's called Paradolia. We know that exists because our brain is trying to process images when there are none. So again, there's no other animal in the animal kingdom that could do any of this. We can't explain a mystery with another mystery.
Yeah, and I think that's I'm glad you said that, because I've said something similar on the show before. It's like you're trying to explain a phenomenon wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in an enigma with another mystery, and you just can't really do that. Now, I have interviewed folks that Les Stroud comes to mind. When I had Les on the show, he had a couple of what he called mind speak or telepathic communication with what he believes to be a Sasquatch. One point they asked him, "Do you want to see us? If you do, stay." And he was like, "No, I'm getting the hell out of here. I don't want to be here." Right. So, and now he regrets it. He wishes he had stayed and maybe saw what they wanted to show him. But, I agree with you. I was a cop too. And I had a lot of experiences where, that thing in your mind tells you, get the hell out of here, or you need to walk around behind your patrol car and come up on the passenger side or whatever. And 99 times out of 100, it was just exactly what you needed to do. So I think a lot of that happens when people get in the woods and they have experiences that they can't explain. And maybe it is because something like that is around, or it could be a mountain lion. Who knows? Like you said, if it doesn't move and you don't see it, you don't know what it is. I think it's just our brain and people misconstruing something that's very innate in all of us, just
Right.
my opinion. Let's talk a little bit about your show. How did your show come about? What is your show about? What do you cover on the show? What did you start the show for? Everybody has that story of, I know why I started my show. What was that for you, and what did that process look like?
We originally started the show. The show's called Dax Machina, and I wanted something that would allude to my literary background. And I thought of the phrase Deus Ex Machina. And Deus Ex Machina just means machine of the gods. It's an old writing trope where, a writer will write themselves into a corner and something unbelievably miraculous will happen to save the character. And we've all seen books like that. We've all watched movies like that where the character is 9 feet tall and bulletproof, and it gets him out of the worst situations that no human probably would have survived. It's just an old writing trope. So I wanted to do something based on that. So I used my initials, DA Ex Machina, machine of DA, if you will. And I interviewed a lot of writers. I still do. I've got a few other writers I'm planning on bringing on. We talked about horror. We talked about, my favorite TV series of all time, Kolchak the Night Stalker, which really got me wanting to write horror in the first place back when I was a kid. But we delved into pretty much everything that went bump in the night, and my love of cryptids just kind of naturally got brought into that. So now we do probably more cryptid than we do anything else. But we've got a lot of stuff coming up. Cam Buckner from Dixie Cryptids is going to be on this coming Wednesday night, and we're gonna talk. We're going to talk Bigfoot and Dogman and just have a good old time of it. Cam's got 2 of my books out on audio right now on his Dixie Cryptid and What If It's True podcast. It's books 1 and 2 of the Codename Wild Hunt series. Looking to have the 3rd one up and out probably before Christmas, maybe end of this month, depending on how quickly Cam gets it done. But Cam and I've got a lot of projects that we're working on together. I've written short stories for his channel, and I've got more coming with his Steve Lilly series. I love that character. But we've got a lot of projects we're going to be working on together over the next, probably several years. I've got 27 books in print. He's done 2. So we've got a lot of material to cover, and I'm still producing books. I mean, I'm writing the 4th installment of the Codename Wild Hunt series right now. It's going to be called Codename Wild Hunt: Death in Dyatlov Pass. It's set in Russia, and it deals with the legend around, let's say, the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's not directly about that, but it's in that area. But I'm going to be doing a lot more cryptid work, especially with Cam. And cryptids is just kind of something I was very passionate about. And for a lot of years when I was still a cop, I kind of kept that on the down low, because you really don't want someone on the defense attorney pulling up, oh, by the way, I hear you believe in Bigfoot. And suddenly you look like a dumbass on the witness stand. So I kind of kept that on the down low while I was a cop, but I still did it in my spare time. And when I'd go to training seminars and stuff, I would kind of feel people out. Then I'd talk to other cops, and I got a lot of great stories from cops over the years. A lot of cops have seen stuff that they can't explain. I'll tell you the best one. I think you're going to like this. I went to a training seminar down. I think it was in Hot Springs, Arkansas. It was somewhere in Arkansas. I believe it was Hot Springs. But anyway, there's a whole bunch of us down there. And I get to talking to this guy, career cop. And I told him a little bit about my background with Bigfoot, and he kind of at first was just a little hesitant. And then when everybody was kind of off doing their own stuff at lunch, he came over and sat down. And he goes, all right, I'm going to tell you a story, but you can't ever use my name, and I don't want you telling anybody about this. Don't associate it with me. You can use the story, but don't ever give him my name. I'm like, okay. He said, a few years back, I had a hunting area picked out near in the Ozark National Forest. And he said, had my deer stand and everything. I got out there real early, had one of those soft-sided coolers, and I tied the cooler to my leg so it wouldn't fall. And I dozed off, waiting for sun come up. He said, I was 12, 15 feet off the ground. He says, and I woke up. There was something tugging at my lunchbox. I said, well, what happened? He said, I opened my eyes, and at my knee is this thing's head. And he described it. It was a very dark brown Bigfoot. He said it wasn't black. It was just very dark brown, and it was tugging at that lunchbox. I said, what'd you do? He said, I cut the strap and let it have the lunchbox. I said, well, then what happened? He goes, it turned and walked off and headed out of the area with my lunchbox. I said, did you take a shot at it? He goes, hell no, I didn't take a shot at it. He says, what I did do was I climbed down out of that tree and left, got in my truck and went home. The next day I sold my deer hunting equipment. I'm never going back out there. And I said, well, he was a lifelong deer hunter, grew up doing it from a kid. He said, I'll never hunt again. I'm not going out there. I don't want to see another one of these things. He said, that thing could have killed me. And no one would ever known what happened to me. He said, in fact, if you want that deer stand, I'll tell you how to get there. I didn't even go back for it.
I think there's so many stories out there like that. And that's one of the things that I love about collecting these anecdotal stories on shows like this one, is because there are so many people who experience things like that. And people, Bigfoot particularly gets sensationalized a lot, and people think, well, everybody's just making these stories up. And I'm telling you, that's the kind of story that people aren't making up.
He was shook up when he was telling me.
Right. There's no reason for anybody to make a story like that up. And you may be the only person, maybe the second or third person he'll ever tell in his life that happened, because they don't want people to think they're crazy and all the things that come with the negative of telling those kind of stories and relating those kind of experiences. You mentioned it. So I'm going to pin you down here and ask you, because I've got opinions about the Dyatlov Pass incident myself. In a quick synopsis, what do you think actually happened during that incident? Everybody says it could be a possible Bigfoot. There's even a photograph out there. People say it looks like a purported Sasquatch or Yeti or something standing in the background of a photo. What do you think happened during that incident?
Well, considering that they cut their way out of their tent and fled without shoes or anything on, they were definitely afraid of something. Now, was that Russian military coming in a helicopter? Was it Yeti? Was it the abominable snowman? Was it just simply that they'd, eaten something that caused mild hallucinations? I can't say for sure, but I don't think we're ever really going to know, because I don't think the Russians are ever going to open up and say exactly what happened. But I think they stumbled into something they weren't prepared for. And I think the Russian military was involved, because some of the state of some of the corpses, like the tongue was missing on one, and some soft tissue. That's the kind of tissue you collect when you're looking for radiation. It's not something animals normally go after when they find a dead body, unless they're dead with the mouth open, then maybe, but they were still frozen. So that would have been a hard piece to get. So I think they stumbled into something and were killed for it. I don't know that they were necessarily taken out by a cryptid, but considering all of the evidence and that some of them were mildly radioactive, I think they got caught up in an experiment and were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I tend to agree with you. Everybody thinks it's a Bigfoot, and who knows, it could have been something along those lines, but I think it's a little bit more mundane than that too. And like you said, I don't think we'll ever know, because I don't think the Russian government's going to ever hand over those documents. Last question. I want to get your opinion on this. I've went back and forth with this with so many people on the show about this conspiracy of this massive government cover up of cryptids, Dogman, Bigfoot in particular, right? I believe that happens on some level, but from one cop to another, I worked for the City of Atlanta Police Department, a pretty decent size department here in the Southeast, and a pretty decently sized city. You worked for a couple of different departments in your career. And I've said it so many times, people would be absolutely shocked at what the government doesn't know, at least on that level. Right.
Yeah. So, institutionalized idiots. I mean, exactly. There's so many things that they're like, oh,
right. And pointing fingers at the other person that should have known, and vice versa. Right. So I'll ask you this. Do you think there is some big giant cover up by the government at large to cover up cryptids and in general, Bigfoot, Dogman, or do you think that's more of a localized thing? What's your opinion on that?
How much time do I have to answer that question?
As long as you want to take.
All right. One of the earliest known encounters that we have on a written document of a Sasquatch attack is the Bauman incident. That was recorded by Teddy Roosevelt back way before he was in politics, in his book, The Wilderness Hunter. The book is still available. You can go on Amazon and buy that book. The Bauman incident is in that. Now, I grew up in the hills of Missouri. I've got relatives that are hillbillies. I've got people that I've known my entire lives who were subsistence livers. They lived off the land. They hunted for it. They supplemented their family's diet, and we did to a large extent on deer and wild turkey and things like that. Any of those guys that I ever talked to who had any kind of Bigfoot encounter would tell you, but you didn't get like the details of the area where they were hunting. You didn't get that kind of picture. You got the bare bones information out of these guys because they didn't want to talk about it. So the level of detail that Teddy Roosevelt got about the Bauman incident leads me to believe, and there's a lot of people who agree with me, that Bauman was Roosevelt. And he didn't want to use his own name in that story because he had political aspirations. So if we take that as a given, that Bauman was actually Teddy Roosevelt himself. Flash forward, President Teddy Roosevelt. What's one of the first things he does? He created the National Park Service and cordoned off millions of acres that we are still not allowed to access and have hunting of even today. I think he knew about these things and he set up preserves to keep us away from them. But to an extent, we're still seeing them outside those areas. And if you look at the more missing 411 cases, just how many people go missing in those national parks. And now the missing 411 cases doesn't document every time somebody went off trail and fell and broke a leg and went missing in the park and was later found. He documents the weird ones. And the ones that I find most compelling are the ones where dogs will not track. You and I both were in law enforcement. How often do you ever see a dog refuse to track?
Almost never.
Those dogs live for the track. They cannot wait to get out and run somebody down because then they get praise and they get treats and they get belly rubs. Those dogs cannot wait to do that. I've worked with a half a dozen different Maligators, and those Belgian Malinois, they just, that's their whole existence is, let me go. They want to track this thing down. So for them to catch a whiff of something and lay down like, nope, I'm out. That's completely outside the character for those dogs. So those are the ones I find the most compelling. And the missing 411 cases that I really do find the most compelling are the ones that involved hunters, armed hunters, guys who had hunted the same plot of land for years and then vanished without a trace. Guys that knew that area as well as the back of their own hand. They weren't going to get lost. They'd hunted this area literally for years and they disappear. Now, I've taken dozens upon dozens of accounts from hunters who said, and one of my co-hosts on my show, Anthony Canatella, he had a Bigfoot in the crosshairs of his scope and didn't take the shot because he said it looked too human to take the shot. He wasn't sure what he was aiming at. I think the missing 411 hunters took the shot.
You could be right, man. I've thought that myself, and I've talked to people who have had these things in their crosshairs too and said they couldn't take the shot because they did look so human. So you could very well be right, man. I don't know. It's definitely interesting. And that whole missing 411 thing has always puzzled me because I've gotten into those books. I've gotten into the couple of movies that they've done about those. And there's some really compelling stories there. And like you said, the ones that I think are the most compelling to me, at least, are the hunters that just vanish without a trace from places that they've been thousands of times. And it makes you wonder, were they the guys up in the tree stand that had their lunch tied around their leg and they got dragged out of the tree, right?
Yeah.
They didn't just wake up and the thing take the lunch. Maybe he took the entire hunter. So I don't know.
I think the primary difference, though, between Bigfoot and Dogman encounters is pretty much everybody I've ever talked to that had an eyewitness encounter with a Dogman described it using either the words hellish or demonic. Dogmen to me are more predator than Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot, you run the gamut of personalities just like you will in people. You might run into one that might help you one day, but the next day it's hungry and you don't know. I think that there are ones that are peaceful. I also think there are ones that are extremely aggressive. The individuals have personalities just like people. I mean, you take if you own two different dogs and they're both of the same breed, they will not have the same temperament because they're different animals. So I think, we're very much going to see that in Bigfoot, but Dogman is different. Dogmen are dangerous. And I think a lot of these missing 411 cases very well could have just been running across one. I think they are definitely killers. And I think if you run into one and you're alone in the woods, your odds of coming out of anything other than a bowel movement is probably pretty low.
I definitely would not argue with that at all. Man, I've had a good time having you on the show, DA. Everybody go over and check out Dax Machina. I'll have a link in the show notes, and I'll have a link to all 27 of your books.
Thanks, man.
People to go pick them up. You guys check them out. And if you haven't already, like I said, go over and give Cam a listen on his Dixie Cryptid podcast or his What If It's True podcast. D, man, I've had a good time talking to you, man. We'll have to do this again soon.
Hey, brother, anytime. I enjoy it.